I was never my parents' favorite, not even close. That title belonged to my younger sister, Sophia, their golden child, their so-called miracle. They adored her, worshipped her, forgave her for everything, even when she ruined my life time and time again. But when they chose her over me one last time, sending her on our family vacation, instead of me, they finally saw what I had known all along. Sophia was a monster. I had always known my place in the family. I wasn't the favorite, the cherished one, or the one my parents doted on. That role belonged to Sophia, my younger sister, their golden child, their miracle. My parents had lost a baby before she was born, and when Sophia arrived, it was as if she had been sent from above to heal their wounds. From the moment she took her first breath, she was their world. She could do no wrong. She was perfect. And I was just there. At first, I tried to love her like any older sister would. I wanted to be the protective one, the one who looked out for her, who helped her with homework, who stood up for her at school. But I was wrong about who she really was. It wasn't innocence behind her big doe eyes. It was something much darker. Even as a child, Sophia had an uncanny way of twisting reality, bending it in her favor with just the right words, the perfect tears, the well-timed pout. She learned early on that our parents would believe anything she said. It started small. Little lies, small tricks, things a parent would dismiss as childish mischief. She would take my favorite toys and blame it on the dog, spill juice on my homework and claim it was an accident. But as we grew older, her games became crueler, more calculated. On my 10th birthday, my grandparents gave me a beautiful antique pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down for generations. It was special, something I would one day give to my own children. I treasured it. Sophia, however, hated that I had something she couldn't have. She whined, sulked, even begged our parents to make me share it with her. But they couldn't. It had come directly from my grandparents, and even they knew that some things weren't meant to be shared. That night, as I crawled into bed, I felt something brush against my cheek, something alive. Before I could move, I realized it was crawling, skittering across my skin. I screamed. My hands flailed as I leapt from my bed, my heart hammering in terror. My parents rushed in, confused and alarmed, turning on the lights to find me shaking, my pillow tossed onto the floor. And there, sitting right on top of it, was a spider. A large house spider, its thin legs still twitching. Sophia stood in the doorway, eyes wide, a picture of concern. "Oh my gosh," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I knew. I locked eyes with her, and I saw it. That glimmer, that small, smug satisfaction buried beneath her fake worry. I didn't have proof. I couldn't say how she had done it, but I knew she had placed it there. And the next day, when we were alone, she confirmed it. She leaned in, close enough for her breath to tickle my ear, and whispered, "That's what happens when you don't share." The smirk. That same smirk I would see so many times over the years. I tried to tell my parents. I tried to make them see, but they brushed it off, saying I was overreacting. "She's just a kid, Emily. She wouldn't do something like that on purpose." But I saw her for what she was. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped trying to compete with her. There was no point. If I got a good grade, Sophia cried that she was struggling, and my parents praised her effort instead of my achievement. If I got a new dress, she'd spill something on it within days. And if I ever showed interest in a boy, she ruined it. Every time. I still remember the night I invited Mark over. He was my classmate, someone I had secretly liked for months. I had worked up the courage to ask him to come over and watch a movie with me. I carefully picked out a dress, one that made me feel pretty, confident, like I actually mattered. But the moment he arrived, Sophia struck. She accidentally spilled an entire glass of juice all over my dress, laughing as I gasped in shock. My mother scolded me for being clumsy, completely missing Sophia's satisfied little grin. And as I scrambled to change, humiliated, she cornered Mark in the living room. By the time I returned, he wouldn't look me in the eye. He was uncomfortable, distant, barely made it through the movie. When he left, Sophia leaned against the doorway and whispered, "You can do better than her." He never spoke to me again. By then, I had stopped telling my parents anything. What was the point? They would never believe me. The moment I turned 18, I left for college and never looked back. I built my own life, one where I wasn't standing in Sophia's shadow. I landed a great job in New York City, worked hard, and finally felt free. But I still came home for the holidays, still tried to play the role of the good daughter. And every time, Sophia made sure I felt unwelcome. She would ignore me, mess with my belongings, steal my clothes. And if I ever called her out, my parents would dismiss it as sibling rivalry. I started visiting less and less. My parents barely noticed. They chalked it up to me being busy with work, and honestly, maybe I was fine with that. But then, one day, everything changed. I got the call. My father had a heart attack. It hit me like a brick to the chest. He had always been strong, steady, the backbone of our family. The thought of losing him made my stomach twist. No matter how I felt about my parents, this was my father. I needed to be there. I dropped everything, booked the next flight home. And when I arrived, for the first time in years, my parents needed me. My father, fragile and weak, grabbed my hand and said, "I don't want to waste any more time. I want us all together." So when he suggested a family vacation to Hawaii, something to celebrate his second chance at life, I swallowed my hesitation and agreed. Sophia, however, did not look happy. She sat there, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. I recognized that look. I had seen it too many times before, and I should have known. I should have known she wasn't going to let me have this moment. I had no idea that she was already planning her next move. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But after years of pushing away the pain, of trying to convince myself that I no longer cared, I had let my guard down. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed that maybe, just maybe, my father's heart attack had changed things. Maybe this vacation would be a turning point, a chance to finally feel like I belonged in my own family. But Sophia wasn't about to let that happen. From the moment I agreed to the trip, she had been simmering with quiet resentment. She barely spoke to me, avoiding eye contact at dinner, shutting her bedroom door whenever I was nearby. I could feel the tension radiating off of her like heat from a fire, but I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just upset about our dad's health scare. Maybe, for once, her anger wasn't about me. I should have known better. The morning of our flight, I woke up with an unexpected sense of anticipation. It had been years since I'd been on a real vacation with my family. Years since I had allowed myself to hope that we could have a moment of peace. I packed my bags, double-checked my flight confirmation, and rode with my parents to the airport. Everything felt normal, until it wasn't. We reached the check-in counter, and I handed over my passport, waiting for the agent to print my boarding pass. She scanned the reservation, then frowned slightly, tapping at her keyboard. "That's strange," she muttered. "What's wrong?" I asked, a sliver of unease creeping up my spine. She shook her head, still typing. "It looks like your ticket has been canceled." I blinked. "That's impossible. My dad booked all 4 tickets together." She turned the monitor slightly, showing me the screen. There were 4 names listed on the original booking: my parents, Sophia, and me. But next to my name, one word stood out like a flashing red light. Canceled. The unease twisted into something heavier. I turned to my father, who was already pulling up his phone, confusion etched on his face. "I don't understand," he muttered. "I booked all 4 tickets at the same time. I got the confirmation for all of them. And then I felt it, a gaze burning into the side of my face. I turned slowly, and there she was, Sophia, standing there with her arms crossed, lips curled into a barely concealed smirk. I knew instantly. I had seen that smirk too many times before. "Did you do this?" My voice came out sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Sophia raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Do what?" I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "You canceled my ticket," she scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh, come on, Emily. Why would I even do that? But I wasn't imagining it." I could see it, the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. the tiny victory in the way she shifted her weight onto one foot. I turned to my parents, hoping for once that they would finally believe me, that after years of being blind to Sophia's manipulation, they would see the truth. But of course, that wasn't what happened. My mother sighed, rubbing her temples as if she were the one who had been wronged. "Emily, you always assume the worst about your sister. This was probably just a mistake with the airline." My stomach dropped. "A mistake?" I gestured to the screen. "Mom, my ticket is the only one that was canceled. That doesn't just happen." My father, still staring at his phone, tried to play the peacemaker. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe we can talk to someone and get it fixed." I turned back to the airline agent, my hands trembling with frustration. "Can I rebook the ticket?" She frowned, glancing at the departure board. "I'm afraid this flight is completely full. The next available flight isn't until tomorrow evening." Tomorrow evening, meaning I would have to travel alone, meaning I would arrive late, missing the first day of the vacation, meaning I would be left behind while my family carried on without me. And the worst part? They didn't even seem to care. My father hesitated, glancing between me and my mother. "Maybe we should all just go home and book a new trip," he suggested, sounding genuinely torn. But my mother was already shaking her head. "Richard, we've been planning this for months. We don't need to change everything over a simple booking error. Emily travels all the time for work. She can catch up with us tomorrow." And there it was, a lifetime of being the afterthought, wrapped up in a single sentence. They didn't want to fight for me. They didn't want to believe me. And they certainly didn't care enough to stay behind. I swallowed back the lump in my throat. "Right," I said, my voice hollow. "I guess it's no big deal. Just another family trip without me." My father hesitated, looking guilty, but my mother gave me a patronizing smile, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Come on, honey. It's just one day. You'll be there before you know it." I turned to Sophia one last time. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Her smirk had deepened, her eyes shining with victory. She had won, and my parents? They had let her. Again. So, I did the only thing I could. I stepped back from the counter, lifted my bag onto my shoulder, and nodded. "Fine. Go ahead without me." My mother gave me a bright, relieved smile, as if she had just solved a minor inconvenience. That's the spirit. And just like that, they walked away. I stood there, frozen, watching as they moved toward the terminal, laughing, chatting, not even glancing back. For them, nothing had changed. For me, everything had. I left the airport and didn't bother booking another flight. Instead, I went back to New York, back to the life I had built for myself, back to a world where I mattered. For days, I didn't hear much from them. A few casual texts from my mom, photos of the beach, of my father smiling, of Sophia posing with cocktails as if nothing had happened. They were having the time of their lives without me. And yet, deep down, I had a feeling that their perfect little vacation was about to fall apart. Sophia had won this battle, but something told me she was about to lose the war. I tried to move on. Back in New York, I told myself that missing the vacation was a blessing in disguise. I had dodged yet another opportunity for my sister to make my life miserable. If I had gone, I would have been stuck sharing a hotel room with her, enduring her passive-aggressive comments, her constant need to remind me that I didn't belong. This way, at least, I had my peace. But no matter how hard I tried, the sting of it still lingered. The worst part wasn't that my flight had been canceled. It was that they left without me. They could have fought for me. They could have demanded answers, pushed to get me rebooked, or even, God forbid, stayed behind and rescheduled the trip. But they didn't. Instead, they had boarded that plane without hesitation, acting as if my absence was nothing more than an unfortunate inconvenience. And that realization, more than anything, hurt the most. I spent the first few days of my vacation distracting myself, reconnecting with old friends, catching up on books I had neglected, even treating myself to a solo spa day. If my family didn't care about me, then I would make sure I cared about myself. But then, on the fourth morning, I woke up to 6 missed calls from my mother. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I sat up, staring at the notifications. My parents weren't the type to bombard me with calls unless something was seriously wrong. My first thought was my father's heart. Maybe the stress of travel had been too much. Maybe he had collapsed, and they were calling me in a panic. I immediately dialed back. My mother picked up after the first ring. "Mom, what's going on? Is Dad okay?" She was sobbing, not just crying, sobbing. I could barely make out her words between her shaky breaths. "It's Sophia," she gasped. A wave of emotions surged through me, all at once: confusion, concern, and a deep, sinking feeling of inevitability. I didn't know what had happened yet, but something told me this was the moment. This was the moment they finally saw her for who she really was. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. What did she do? There was a shuffle on the other end of the line before my father's voice came through, low, hoarse, and shaken. "Emily, she's been stealing my heart medication." The world stopped. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter, sure I had misheard. "What?" "We started noticing that his pills were going missing," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first we thought maybe we had misplaced them, but they kept disappearing, and Richard was getting dizzy, lightheaded. It wasn't until this morning," she choked on a sob. "I went into Sophia's room to borrow sunscreen and I found them, all of them, hidden in her nightstand." I felt sick. My sister, their beloved golden child, had been withholding my father's life, saving medication. Mom, she could have killed him. My voice shook with rage. What was she thinking? Why would she? And then it hit me. She wanted revenge for me being invited in the first place, for the simple fact that I was included, even though she had made sure I didn't actually go. And she didn't care who she hurt in the process. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a deep breath to calm the fury boiling inside me. "Did you confront her?" A silence stretched over the line. Then my father exhaled shakily. "Yes, and it didn't go well. I braced myself." "How bad?" She snapped, he admitted. She started screaming, throwing things, saying we never loved her, that we always favored you, that if we didn't cut you out of our lives completely, she would. His voice caught. I frowned. "She would what?" "She said she'd make us pay." A cold chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "She said we'd regret it," my mother whispered. And then she went into full hysterics, breaking furniture, throwing things. The hotel staff called security. When they came to calm her down, she spit on one of them. My stomach dropped. "Security called the police," my father said, his voice tired and hollow. "She got arrested." I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to process everything. My perfect sister, their precious miracle child, had just landed herself in jail in a foreign country. The weight of it all was crushing. "Emily," my mother whimpered, "what do we do?" For the first time in my life, I had all the power. They had gone on this trip without me, had dismissed my claims about Sophia for years, had made me feel like I was always the one causing problems, when in reality, it had been her all along. And now, they needed me. For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "Mom, you need to get out of there. But we can't just leave her. She stole Dad's medication," I snapped. "She put his life in danger. And now she's throwing tantrums, making threats. You need to go. Find a way home. Now." Another silence. And then, quietly, my father said, "That's the plan. But there's a problem." My stomach clenched. "What now?" "We can't find our passports." A pause. "Or our wallets." I felt my blood run cold. Sophia had taken them. My sister, the one they had always protected, had deliberately trapped them in a foreign country with no identification and no money. She was unraveling. And for the first time in their lives, my parents were seeing it happen in real time. They had always excused her behavior, always brushed aside the things she had done to me. But now they were feeling what I had felt my entire life: betrayed, manipulated, powerless. I took a slow breath and exhaled. "Okay," I said, "I'll help. But we do things my way now." My mother didn't argue. She just whispered, "Okay." And for the first time, I felt it. The tides had shifted. Sophia had spent years making sure I was the outsider. Now, she was about to learn what it felt like to be the one left behind. For years, my parents had turned a blind eye. They had ignored the warning signs, dismissed my cries for help, and allowed Sophia to twist the truth over and over again. No matter what she did, they always had an excuse, a justification, a reason why she was still their perfect golden child. But now, as they sat stranded in a foreign country with no passports, no money, and their beloved daughter sitting in a jail cell, they were finally seeing the truth, and they were terrified. I could hear it in their voices as they called me every few hours, panicked and helpless. My mother, who had always defended Sophia no matter what, was on the verge of breaking down. My father, usually calm and steady, sounded defeated. They had always believed they were in control, that they could handle her. Now they were realizing they never had control. And Sophia? She had gone from spoiled brat to complete tyrant. After being released from jail, she returned to the hotel in full meltdown mode. She screamed at my parents, blamed them for everything, and accused them of choosing me over her. Her tantrum was so bad that hotel security threatened to remove her permanently. But the moment my father really confronted her about stealing his heart medication, things took a dark turn. Sophia didn't deny it. She laughed. And then, with cold, biting cruelty, she told them the truth. I was making a point, she sneered. I wanted you to feel what it's like when someone takes something from you. My mother gasped, horrified. Sophia, that medication keeps your father alive. She just shrugged. Yeah? And yet, here he is. Still breathing. That was it. The moment, the breaking point. The line that, for the first time in their lives, my parents refused to let her cross. They told her she was on her own. At first, Sophia didn't believe them. She had always been able to manipulate her way out of consequences, always convinced them to forgive her. So she taunted them, pushed them further, waiting for them to fold like they always did. But they didn't. And when they demanded their passports and wallets back, she did something even they hadn't expected. She refused. Instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of remorse, she told them they deserved this, that they had always favored me, that they had never truly loved her, and that she was done pretending to be their daughter. Then she stormed out. And just like that, my parents were stranded. No passports, no credit cards, no money, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. I wasn't sure what to feel as I listened to my mother sob over the phone, begging me to help them. I could have said no. I could have told them this was their problem to fix, that they had chosen Sophia over me for years, and now they were reaping what they had sown. But as much as I wanted to throw their betrayal back in their faces, I couldn't ignore the fact that they were scared, that my father's health was fragile, that for the first time in their lives, they were the ones who needed me. So I did the only thing I could. I wired them money through Western Union so they could at least book a place to stay. I called the U.S. Embassy on their behalf, getting them an appointment to apply for emergency passports. I found a travel agency that could book them an early flight home once their documents were sorted. It took 2 full days to get everything arranged. 2 days where Sophia was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared. My parents searched for her, called her phone over and over, even reached out to local authorities. But she was gone, and that's when my mother finally said it. Words I had waited my whole life to hear. Emily, you were right. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to let it sink in. I wanted her to feel the weight of those words, to truly understand what she was admitting. Because this wasn't just about the stolen medication, or the lost passports, or even Sophia's arrest. This was about everything: the childhood torment, the manipulation, the years of being cast aside because they refused to see the truth. And now, here they were, sitting in a foreign country, completely abandoned by the daughter they had worshipped. They were finally living the reality I had known all my life. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, even. "What do you want me to say, Mom?" She sniffled, sounded so small. I don't know how we got here." I laughed. Not out of humor, but because of how unbelievable this moment was. "You got here because you let it happen," I said bluntly. "You let her treat me like garbage my entire life. You made excuses, defended her, allowed her to do whatever she wanted because you didn't want to believe that your precious daughter was capable of cruelty." She was silent. And then, softly, brokenly, she whispered, "I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes, trying to push down the flood of emotions. Was it enough? Could a simple apology undo years of hurt? No, but it was a start. My father spoke next, his voice rough. "When we get home, we need to fix this. We need to make things right." I swallowed hard. "And Sophia?" My mother let out a shaky breath. "She's not coming back with us." That's when I knew. This wasn't just one bad fight. This was it. The golden child had finally fallen. For the first time ever, my parents were choosing me. And as much as I wanted to hold on to my anger, my bitterness, I realized something in that moment. I had won. Not in a petty way, not in a "I told you so" way, but because after all these years, I was no longer the outsider. Sophia had finally pushed too far, and now, she was the one left behind. The day my parents landed back in New York, I met them at the airport. Not because I wanted to not at first. A part of me felt like they should face this homecoming alone, without my help. After all, when they boarded that flight for their family vacation, they had been more than happy to leave me behind. But when my mother called, her voice trembling with exhaustion, asking if I could pick them up, something in me softened. They had changed. I could hear it in the way they spoke to me now, the way they hesitated when choosing their words, as if afraid of pushing me away. So I went. When I spotted them at baggage claim, they looked like different people. My father, who had always carried himself with quiet confidence, seemed smaller, somehow aged beyond his years. My mother, usually so put together, had dark circles under her eyes, her expression a mix of guilt and relief when she saw me. For the first time in my life, I saw regret. And for the first time in theirs, they saw me. The car ride home was quiet. No one knew what to say. The weight of everything that had happened hung between us like fog, thick and suffocating. It wasn't until we pulled into their driveway that my father finally broke the silence. "We need to talk," I nodded, even though I already knew where this was going. They were going to apologize. They were going to try to undo years of damage in a single conversation. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I had spent years feeling like a stranger at. My mother reached across, placing her hand on mine, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "Emily," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we failed you. I didn't move." I just let her speak. "For so long, we thought we were protecting Sophia," she continued. "We thought we were making up for the baby we lost before her. But in doing that, we lost you." I clenched my jaw, my chest tightening. "We should have believed you," my father said, his voice rough. "We should have seen what was right in front of us. But we didn't. And because of that, we hurt you." I could see the sincerity in their eyes, the pain, the shame, and I wanted to let go of the anger, to let it dissolve into the air like smoke. But after years of being cast aside, I couldn't. Not yet. So I took a deep breath and spoke the words I had held inside for far too long. "You didn't just fail me," I said, my voice steady. "You enabled her. You let her destroy everything she touched because you refused to see who she really was. And now, you're only realizing it because she did it to you." My mother's face crumpled, her hands shaking. My father exhaled, nodding. "You're right," he admitted. "We deserved what happened. It wasn't excuses. It wasn't justifications, just honesty." And for the first time in my life, I felt like they were finally listening. But Sophia wasn't done. I knew it was only a matter of time before she came crashing back into their lives. And sure enough, 2 days later, she did. It started with a phone call. I was at my apartment, trying to focus on work, when my phone buzzed. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I answered, already bracing myself. "She's here," she whispered. I closed my eyes. Of course, she was. "What does she want? She's begging us to let her stay." I laughed. Not out of humor, but because of how predictable it all was. Sophia had burned every bridge, and now she had nowhere left to go. I could already picture it, her standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes, voice trembling as she spun another one of her lies. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid that my parents would fall for it, because they had finally seen her for who she was. "What did you tell her?" I asked. There was a pause, and then we told her no. I sat up straight, stunned. "You what?" My father's voice came through, firm. "We told her she needs to leave, that we're done." I swallowed, trying to process it. "And?" she snapped, my mother admitted, her voice shaking. "She started screaming, saying we abandoned her, that it's my fault, that I turned you against her." I let out a slow breath. "She's losing control," I said quietly. "Yes," my father agreed. "But we're not bending this time." And for the first time, I believed him. Sophia didn't leave quietly. She screamed. She threw things. She threatened to ruin them. She told them she would go to the police, make false accusations, destroy their careers. But they didn't cave. And when she realized that, she left. No goodbye, no final plea, just gone. And just like that, the golden child had nowhere left to go. For the next few weeks, my parents stayed with me in New York. It was strange having them in my space, trying to mend what had been broken. They didn't push. They didn't demand forgiveness. They just tried. And that meant more than any apology ever could. One night, my mother asked me something I hadn't expected. "Do you think we can ever fix this?" I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had once dismissed my pain, this woman who had once let my sister destroy me, this woman who now sat before me, trying to put the pieces back together, and I realized I didn't have an answer. So I told her the truth. "I don't know." She nodded, accepting it, and that was enough. For now, as for Sophia, she tried, one last time. A few weeks later, my mother got a message. It was short, desperate. "Please, I have nowhere to go." She didn't reply. She just looked at me and whispered, "I think it's time we let her go." And for the first time, we did. Life teaches us that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and accountability. As we grow older, we realize that blind loyalty can sometimes do more harm than good. We want to believe the best in those we love, but ignoring toxic behavior doesn't make it go away. It only allows it to grow unchecked. Sophia's story is a painful reminder that enabling bad behavior in the name of love can have devastating. Sophia's story is a painful reminder that enabling bad behavior in the name of love can have devastating consequences. It letting go is the only way to heal. For those it is never too late to choose peace. The past